Hello, everybody. Welcome to the morning show, broadcasting on Channel 9 and WJOP-LP Newburyport, FM 96.3. We're also live streaming on YouTube, Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm delighted to welcome today's guests. First up, we have Amber Hewett here to have a conversation about her work as a clean energy advocate with a focus on offshore wind power. She'll also share with us her experience and lessons learned from her run for state rep from 1st Essex last fall. Then later on in the show, I'm going to be welcoming Ryan Turner and Penny Lazarus of the Newburyport Choral Society. They're here to talk about the Choral Society's plans for their virtual spring program, which they've titled, How Can I Keep From Singing? But first, let me introduce Amber Hewett. She's a native Newburyporter. She earned her degree at UMass Amherst in political science and earth systems, and followed that up with working for the National Wildlife Federation, where she's been an advocate for clean energy. She also, as I mentioned, ran for state rep for 1st Essex last fall. Well, Amber, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit the morning show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, Amber, let's start out talking about clean energy. You've been an advocate for clean energy for the National Wildlife Federation for, I think, more than 7 years now. And I read that part of what sparked your interest in addressing climate change was seeing Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, when you were just 15 years old. I'm curious to find out what message or story in the film impacted and inspired you the most.
Thank you. I love this question. It was such a formative moment in my life. So I'm 30 now. I saw the film at 15. It's defined half of my life, the moment I had in that movie theater. It was really the sense of urgency and responsibility. So what I heard in that film was I had heard of climate change. It already concerned me. I think that seed was already inside me. But seeing the scale of the crisis, the call to action, it really resonated with me in a way that is almost inexplicable. I left that film changed forever. I hardly slept that night, and I'm one of the things I'm most grateful for is seeing it so early in life, because it awoke a passion in me that's only grown stronger ever since, and has really defined my career path and my choices of how I spend my time and how I live my life. So I felt called to this cause, and in a way that has now defined half of my life.
Well, that's really interesting. It has the ring of destiny about it, as you describe your experience watching the film. And I remember being impacted by it in the sense that I think what it did for a lot of people was bring the stakes home to everyone. I think I'd heard the phrase climate change before, but watching that film and seeing some of the physical evidence of the impact climate change was having on the planet really brought it home, I think, to millions of people. So thank you, Al Gore, for the film and for inspiring people like you to then make it center stage in your professional development. So, well, now, you started working for the National Wildlife Federation, and your focus has been on offshore wind power. So I'm curious to find out what made you decide to focus on wind power? Why did you choose that? And what has its potential been elsewhere? And what is its potential to have, do you think, on helping us solve the problem of climate change?
So I moved to Washington, D.C. right after college, shortly after college, to start my career with the National Wildlife Federation. And I went there fearful of what our future held. I had found this secondary passion for political engagement, and I really, I knew that I wanted to work in a space of environmental policy, and had very little clarity. I didn't go down there to work on wind power. I went to Washington to fight climate change and do whatever I could to make a difference in this effort. And when I just days into my time at National Wildlife Federation, I started to learn about our campaign for offshore wind power, which had just started. And it was a product of the downfall of a multi-year attempt to pass a federal climate bill. There was this effort in 2009 and 2010 to pass a cap and trade bill, credit to Henry Waxman and Ed Markey for driving that forward, but it ultimately failed in the Senate and didn't have there was no clear arrow pointing as to what was our federal option to take on this crisis. So as a national organization, we were thinking about what can our climate work look like without this clear path in Washington right now? And the answer in part has been to regionalize our climate efforts and to ensure that we're advocating for things everywhere, large scale, game-changing solutions that we can really feel comfortable putting our effort behind, but that don't put all of our eggs in the Washington, D.C. basket, and give us some more endurance by distributing our efforts. And in the Northeast region in particular, offshore wind power really rises off the map as an untapped opportunity. There was, at the time when I was starting at the organization, there was not a single offshore wind turbine in US waters, despite there being a booming industry around the world. Europe has been building offshore wind turbines since 1991, the year after I was born, and we still don't have an offshore wind industry in the United States. To this day, we only have 2 pilot projects totaling 7 turbines in the entire United States. Wow. So despite the fact that off of the Northeast Atlantic coast, we have a world-class offshore wind resource, it has the potential to completely transform our energy profile in coastal states. And in New England, it could be powering half of our region within a decade with real ambition. I mean, I'm talking about an enormous undertaking, but as someone who's kept up at night by the threat of climate change, I believe we need enormous undertakings. I'm a huge fan of the language behind the Green New Deal because I think we need New Deal scale transformation. And we need to also combat the aligned crisis of economic distress that we're under. So offshore wind provides an incredible employment opportunity, long-term high quality jobs, but it also has the advantage of being advanced technology. We're 30 years behind Europe now. So we get to start an industry. It's a unique opportunity to start an industry using advanced technology. We know how to do this. We need to invest. And so for me, offshore wind has been my beacon of hope for 10 years now as the chance that we have to make a difference and to lead from this region.
Well, I love the phrase beacon of hope, and you make a powerful argument for the many, many benefits of offshore wind power, and Lord knows we need it. But I am curious to find out, because you've been working in the trenches on this, and so you must have a good sense of what's the opposition to offshore wind power? What are the barriers that have gotten in the way, especially in a place like New England, where, hello, everybody, take a walk on the beach, plenty of wind, it's free, it's there all the time. So why the opposition, Amber? What have you learned about the obstacles?
It is purely a lack of political will. So and that's what I found inspiring, because when I first started to learn about offshore wind, particularly interesting as someone who grew up in Massachusetts, because I had spent what felt like most of my life hearing the debate around the first project, Cape Wind, which never came to be, but we debated it for over a decade. And it was, criticized for being too expensive, for being the wrong location, for being an eyesore, for being a threat to wildlife and aviation. I mean, everything that you could throw at this project was thrown at it. The developers fought 27 lawsuits. They won every single one of them, but that litigation delay obstructed the project from ever coming to be. But at a larger scale, what it also did was paint this negative narrative around offshore wind power in general, so that when I moved back to Massachusetts, a year after moving to DC, I started working on our offshore wind campaign, which was based in our Northeast region. So I came back to Massachusetts and have been working from here ever since. And there was a surprising amount of animosity toward offshore wind as an idea across large sectors of our population, across even partners in the environmental movement, really wary of taking this on because, and to just share my own humility, I was new to a conversation that had been playing out for many years. So I was showing up 23 years old, sure that this was the next best thing. And there was a history of real contention. People had gone to bat for Cape Wind and it didn't happen. And they invested years of their advocacy into it. And for many reasons, it wasn't, I guess, the right project to start with. The stars were not aligned there, but that doesn't mean that offshore wind power isn't a significant opportunity, and that the technology has been changing and advancing for the whole time that we debated it. So now we're not talking about building projects close to shore in Nantucket Sound, but 20 miles offshore, out of view with larger turbines. So we need fewer of them. We can choose careful locations in federal waters that do not pose or that minimize and mitigate the threat to wildlife. So there's, and that can power 10,000 homes per turbine. The scale of this technology has really dramatically increased. So we needed to catch up our narrative, and that took years. And we're at a place now where I think in Massachusetts, the acceptance of offshore wind has really come around. Generally, the public and decision makers, I largely see the value, or at least aren't scared of it or threatened by it, with a few exceptions. The commercial fishing industry is significantly concerned about the impact of offshore wind power. It's an unknown to be developed in the place where they make their livelihood. So I'm sensitive to that. But ultimately, I do believe and know from my years of engagement and research that those two industries can coexist. But of course, the fear around it is real and shows up at every turning point and every decision point, and has delayed decisions. And finally, I'll say we've been in a 4-year period of uncertainty on every front. Offshore wind is no exception. Every offshore wind project to move forward will be built in federal waters. Federal waters start 3 miles from shore. That means the areas need to be designated and the final permits need to be issued by the federal government. And we haven't had a federal government friendly to large scale clean energy development for a long time. So we have had a pretty significant obstacle of wanting to push states to be ready to do all their parts, to line up and ultimately be ready when we have a change in Washington.
Which will happen very soon. Well, clearly, what you were up against was a narrative that made it sound dangerous and made people suspicious of it. But it sounds as though part of your work in the trenches has been to shift the narrative. And you point out that the technology itself, of course, technology never stays static, that it's been developing. I had no idea that a single wind turbine could power that many homes. That's an impressive kind of statistic. And I didn't realize how far off the coastline they will be then. And I remember the concerns people expressed, about Nantucket Sound. So you've been working hard. and I can hear the passion when you talk about it, which is inspiring. And yes, hopefully there will be an environment in which the new narrative that you've been laying in place will also lead to action. But along those lines of some of the barriers, there still is pretty widespread denial, I think, about climate change, and a lot of disregard among certain segments of the population for science. At the same time, though, the clock is ticking. And we're approaching a point at which, many scientists say that the damage of carbon emissions, they will reach a point of no return. We're not quite there yet, but we're scarily close to that point. So I did want to find out from you, because your professional life is devoted to these issues. Are you yourself, Amber, are you optimistic about our finding the political will and the new narratives which might support science happening in time to stop the clock and enable us to reverse some of the damage and frankly save the planet?
I describe myself as relentlessly optimistic. I
love that.
I don't think I could have run for office if that weren't the case.
Yeah, I like that.
it was essential to making it through these past 4 years. I believe that this is something that we have to do. It is demanding of everything we've got. The benefits are innumerable, and not just environmentally, not just for the survival truly of our species and every species on this planet, but for for me, that's enough, that this is about the livability of the planet and protecting what we've been given. But that's not a driving force for everyone. I understand that. Offshore wind power, clean energy, climate action, they all bring significant economic benefit. They all bring an opportunity to revitalize our communities around a solution that will need to be upheld for decades. These are long-term, high-quality job opportunities. It gives us an opportunity. I mean, when we are facing so many crises at once. I've talked about the environmental and economic crises, but of course we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, and we are still finally reckoning in a visible way with racial injustice and systemic racism in this country. We have so many problems to solve. And so I draw my optimism from the fact that I believe we need to redefine so many parts of our functioning. So many sectors of our economy and our society need to be transformed to rise to this challenge that the best scientists in the world tell us we have 10 years to solve. So what an opportunity is that to address these other crises that need our attention. And I referenced the Green New Deal and why I love that language. Why would we build a new clean energy sector that didn't disrupt all of the systemic inequities that we uphold every day? And so we have this moment before us to change how we do everything, what our capitalism looks like, who we take care of in our society. We can ensure that a new clean energy sector is built in a way that provides good paying union jobs and pays a prevailing wage, provides high quality healthcare, provides workforce training and education. And so I find inspiration in that. I find optimism in that, because I love it. I can't take credit for this line, but I learned this from the Sunrise Movement, the youth movement for climate action and the creation of millions of jobs, that with climate change, you have two choices: to be overwhelmed by the problem or to be inspired by the solutions. And I choose to be inspired by the solutions because they are transformative at a time when we need transformation. I also find optimism in the fact that we did just elect a president who brings forth a $2 trillion climate plan. I truly believe that the Biden-Harris administration understands the scale of this challenge and the scale of the opportunity to intersect solutions at this moment of multiple crises. And in Massachusetts, we're a leader on many fronts. Part of why I have a love for the Massachusetts state government in general, or a love for what it can be, is because of our rich history of leading on things, of leading on public education and healthcare and marriage equality. And I believe that climate action can be one of those things. As a vulnerable coastal state that is also run by a Democratic majority, we should be able to rise to this challenge. But today, for anyone who's streaming live or watching this today, Governor Charlie Baker has a bill on his desk that he needs to sign by midnight tonight that would bring Massachusetts to a place of rising to this challenge, making a commitment that's aligned with what climate scientists tells us that it needs to be. And so if you're watching this today, please call Charlie Baker and email him and urge him to sign this bill. But I'm optimistic that in Massachusetts, the fact that bill passed, the fact that there's an incredible environmental movement in this state, that we can and must be a leader at this critical moment. So I do have wells of optimism within me still.
Well, and thank you for letting people know about that bill, Amber. I think that's a helpful thing for people to know if they choose to take action on. And also, your vision is inspiring. I've been thinking while you were talking how proud Al Gore would be.
Oh.
to hear what he helped launch in your relentless optimism. And I love the way that you frame the way that many people feel overwhelmed today about the convergence, as you were discussing, about so many kinds of social, economic, climate problems, political problems. I think that you've turned that inside out. And instead of a source for despair, you said, no, because they're converging now, there's an opportunity with each thing we do to impact in kind of a multinodal way, all of those things at once. And that's exciting. So thank you for that. That's a wonderful, different kind of much more hopeful narrative. That's really great. So, well, this gets us into the other major impact on your life was how you were inspired by Obama's presidential campaigns. And I wanted to find out what made those campaigns impactful for you. And did those campaigns play a role in your decision last year to run for the Massachusetts legislature?
Yes, absolutely. So Barack Obama's campaign, his first campaign for office, was playing out during my senior year of high school. So similar to the experience of seeing an inconvenient truth, it hit me at a pivotal moment in my life when I was making decisions about what to study in college and what I wanted my career path to be. And I will say it wasn't just his campaign. I was also very closely following Hillary Clinton's campaign at the same time and found them both incredibly inspiring. To that point, now we're in 2007, to that point, my entire political awareness had been defined by the Bush administration and our post 9/11 existence and everything that came from that. And it wasn't a political reality that drew me to it. I never had felt a pull to Washington. I had always been attracted to government, but considered it something sort of as a hobby, something that I would volunteer with, something that I would follow for the fun of it. But it was really hearing the language at that age, hearing the language in Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's campaigns, these languages of hope and change, and the chapter of history that we were about to write. What ultimately, I wasn't old enough to vote in the primary, so I never had to make the decision between those two candidates. I turned 18 just in time to vote in the general election. So my first vote cast was for Barack Obama, but hearing him say it, how much every one of us deserves to reach our hand to the pen that's writing history, right? Like that we are defining this moment for what it is, and that our reality of self-government is available to each one of us, and that if we neglect it, we will lose it. But if we seize it, we can change it. And so that continues to resonate with me. I just finished his recent memoir, and his language just stirs my heart. But it really is that empowerment of young people that's just been such a consistent message of his, that you have, no matter how, there were so many volunteers on my campaign who were not going to be able to vote in the election. You don't need to be casting a vote. Every one of us has a voice and the ability to make a difference. And so that's just stuck with me. And it sent me to UMass to study political science, and it sent me to Washington, DC, to be closer to that opportunity for action. And ultimately, I surprised myself by finding a love for state government and state legislatures. My career trajectory, deciding to work on offshore wind power, as I mentioned, it brought me back to Massachusetts. And since then, I have worked primarily in statehouses across New England, New York, and New Jersey. And the amount of traction that we can build in a statehouse, the scale being a little smaller, it's really inspired me that we can build real relationships at the state level and really build a community of action, given the proximity to our elected officials, and that our state government is incredibly accessible if we want to access it. And so that really inspired me to, in a way that I didn't expect, to run for state legislature. So I think, I felt that Barack Obama and his campaign and that moment of inspiration were sending me on a path to work in federal government. But then what I found on that path brought me back to the state level, and that certainly surprised me. So I will say, I think his campaign and getting involved with it put me on this track. But then what I found along the way is what inspired me to run for state office.
Well, I am always grateful to people who are willing to run for office, since it appears to me to take an enormous amount of grit and stamina and resilience. So thanks for caring enough to run. And I'm curious to find out, was campaigning for office what you expected it would be? Was it different? And if so, how?
It was very different. And this is an easy answer because of the pandemic. It was, we launched the campaign in December of 2019. So it started exactly as I had envisioned. I had spent a year dreaming up this campaign. And so when we had our launch party at Brick and Ash, it was a packed room. It was high energy. It was positive. It was hopeful. We were able to garner a lot of early engagement and volunteerism, and the events that we had early in the campaign before March of 2020 were what I dreamed they would be. They were people opening up to me and sharing with me their struggles and getting excited about sort of one thing I envisioned for the campaign was that we needed to educate the community on what the job of state representative is. And so that was going really well, that we were reminding people that this isn't just about showing up in the community. It isn't just about bringing money to the community, but it's about policy leadership and initiating things and bringing ideas forward and changing the laws of the Commonwealth in a way that wouldn't change if the person we sent to that building weren't there, that we are sending someone to impact how we choose to govern ourselves. And so those conversations were beautiful, but they were best in person. There is absolutely, we all know this well now, there is no replacement for sitting across the table from someone and hearing their story and holding their hand. And so we lost all of that in March. And as with everything and everyone can relate, everyone's life has changed dramatically. The campaign changed dramatically. And we lost, I think, the most valuable piece. We lost the ability to be in person. Something that was really important to me was being in person with seniors. And we really lost the ability for that to be safe. So that was a tough adjustment that I don't think we ever really recovered from.
Yeah, and of course, was it Tip O'Neill who said all politics is local and all local politics is about, interacting with people one-on-one. So it was, I'm sure, just not clearly what you expected. So, well, Amber, what did you feel like you learned? I mean, so your campaigning had to change. But what did you feel like you learned from the campaigning that you were able to do, mostly virtual, as it was?
We made it work. I mean, we did ultimately decide to knock on doors with masks. We just knocked and stepped way back and spoke from there. So we did some in-person campaigning in the end. We really relied heavily on phone banking. Shout out to every volunteer who showed up week after week after week. I thought we would only be phone banking in the early months of the campaign, and then we would shift to an in-person model almost exclusively. And we ended up needing to be calling right through until election day. Phone banking is hard. It can be really discouraging. It's so much harder to connect on the phone than it is to connect on someone's doorstep. So, but we made it work. We had virtual events, we had virtual fundraisers, we showed up to virtual gatherings. The whole community switched to a virtual model. So we just tapped into that. As someone, I'm comfortable on social media, so we did a lot of organizing and communicating that way. But it was, I'm absolutely through and through an in-person person. So especially as a first-time candidate, we lacked that ability to make a real connection. I think there's such a, of course we live in such a polarized time, and there's such a reluctance to trust someone who's selling you hope and change. That sounds way too far-fetched these days. So when I was bringing it forth as a first-time candidate, many people meeting me and hearing my name for the first time, I found it harder to build that trust because people couldn't really see me and see it in action in a way that I'd hoped they would.
Just a really hard situation. Anyway, thank you for that explanation. And I did want to ask you, running for office, part of the reason I think it takes grit and stamina for anyone to do it, it means that you risk losing after investing so much of yourself in a campaign. So Amber, how did you deal with your loss?
Well, I went to the mountains of Idaho for 5 weeks and spent
Nature.
some time. Nature, absolutely. And I have a 2-year-old niece who is the world's best medicine, and she and I just explored and played in the snow. It really reset and refreshed. But ultimately, these things can only be processed over time. I'm still in that for sure. But I will say, after what we've been through over the past few years nationally, I feel fairly conditioned for disappointing election results. So, I felt more resilient about it than I expected to. The first few days after the loss were really hard. And I was, as you would expect, surrounded by family and secluded and just kind of taking the time and processing. And of course, we were in the dark days of not knowing the results of the national election. So those were a hard few days. But I surprised myself by feeling ready for jumping back in faster than I thought I would. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the campaign, and I can't say a decision as to like what my engagement will look like in the future, but I can say that I'm not leaving political engagement by any stretch. This is my calling, and I'm here to stay.
Well, fair enough. That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, although I wasn't sure if it might be too soon to ask. But I would like to ask you then, I mean, hopefully having to campaign, especially as a first-time candidate during a pandemic, is a once-in-a-lifetime experience and challenge. But I did want to ask you, what would you say to somebody who might be thinking that they'd like to run for office someday? Words of encouragement, words of realism?
I believe that everyone who has that desire and drive should do it. I will say my words of realism are don't take it lightly. It's an incredibly vulnerable and exposing experience. And so personally, I mean, I consider myself an introvert. As much as I love being out with people, I do appreciate my ability to sort of refuel alone and think through things that, over time by myself. And that essentially just goes away. You need to rise to the challenge of thinking on the fly and public decisions and public failure. Losing an election, not getting a job that you really want in front of your whole community is really hard. And it is an incredibly it's a high likelihood of happening. It's really hard to win your first race. It's really hard to be an incumbent. So I believe that we could have done it. I still believe we could have done it. But it is definitely something it's grueling, it's exhausting. And, but it's one of the best things I've ever done. I grew so much through the experience. I learned so much about myself, and ultimately, I mean, you leave the experience with an incredible gift, which is a deeper connection to your community. And I've been here for 5 generations. I thought I knew this community inside and out. Every day of the campaign, I met and connected to a new person. That relationship lives on, that connection lives on. So there's so much value in that. I understand this community on a deeper level. The amount of struggle that we are surrounded by every day that is significant. And I'm glad that I know that. I'm glad that I know what is needed here so that I can be a better and more active member of our community. But if anyone is thinking about running for office here or anywhere, I also just say, please call me, reach out to people who have run, because we should all support and learn from one another. I think, I was a young woman candidate. I launched this campaign at 29 years old. That brought its own challenges with it. And I wouldn't have had it any other way. I'm glad I started early, but there were unique obstacles and challenges that I think were because of the fact that I was a young woman candidate running for the first time with a very progressive platform. So I also really value I'm deeply committed to helping anyone in that wants to take on this challenge.
Well, that's really great to hear, Amber. Thank you for that. It sounds like you gained a lot of wisdom in your campaign as well. Well, I have one final question for you because I'm a relative newcomer to Newburyport myself. I've only been here for 3 years, but I love Newburyport. You're a fifth generation Newburyporter. And now, and I know that, I've had people on the morning show who've been here for 12 generations. So you're kind of in the middle, but I've only been here for like, in effect, a wink of time. I'm aware of that. But I love to talk about what makes this city distinctive, just utterly charming and historic. For me, I have to say the deal maker for me with Newburyport was the first fall I was here, and I was driving down High Street near Bartlett Mall, and they were advertising a festival, and this huge banner said, food, beer, history.
Oh.
Now, in other cities I've been in, you'd see the food and the beer, but you wouldn't have the history. So that, Newburyport, you had me at history on the festival banner. So I would just like to find out, before I let you go, what are your favorite things about Newburyport, Amber?
I love this question. I could talk to you about this all day. I mean, so I'm a huge history buff myself, so I love local history. I'm fascinated by U.S. history and our place, Newburyport's place in the earliest days of this nation and the role that we played in it. And to a more local level, I mean, my grandfather was the first building inspector in Newburyport. And he played a significant role in the decisions that shaped what our downtown looks and feels like today. And he came on board after significant economic downturn, and this was not the city that it is now. And there were options, bulldoze and start fresh, or revitalize and restore what we have. And of course, we get to appreciate the value of those who made that latter choice every day now. So I live right downtown. That was a very intentional choice. I can walk out my door and frequent our small businesses. And I love that. I love that I can, get a coffee at Plum Island Coffee Roasters before my day's work and grab dinner at the Paddle Inn afterward. Our new businesses, our old businesses, the commitment to shaping this community and making places for people to gather. I love that. And then we have it all. We have the natural wonders as well. And of course, the environment is deeply important to me. And part of my, what keeps me fueled to work on climate action is getting out in nature and reminding myself of what I'm working for. And so the fact that we can, from my downtown apartment, that I can bike to the Plum Island Reservation or to Maudsley, that those two, the beach and the wooded experience are within reach in just minutes is truly unique and something that never gets old. I mean, getting out on and that we live somewhere that has such a beautiful 4-season experience. Walking downtown when it's dusted in snow gets me every time. So it's all of it, and the people here, of course.
Food, beer, history.
Food, beer, history. I know.
Well put, Amber. Amber, thank you so much. It's just been a delight to have you on the morning show. Keep us posted on how things develop. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. It's really just been wonderful to talk to you and to learn about your experience, both with advocating for helping us save the planet, and also to learn from you speak with great eloquence about what you learned from your first campaign. So thank you very much for visiting the morning show, Amber.
Well, the pleasure has been all mine. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. I hope to see you soon.
Very much appreciate your visit. Take care, Amber.
You too.
Bye-bye. Well, now let's get Ryan Turner and Penny Lazarus on screen. They're going to be talking to us about the semester's plans for the Newburyport Choral Society. Ryan Turner is music director for the Newburyport Choral Society. He had the challenge of starting out with the Choral Society just as a pandemic hit. And Penny Lazarus is Alto section leader and something of a music maven for Newburyport, if I must say, and a total Renaissance woman. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for being here to talk about your plans for this second semester of virtual rehearsal for the Newburyport Choral Society. Ryan, thank you for coming. I appreciate you
morning.
being here. And Penny,
Nice to
thank
see
you
you.
as well. It's nice to have you. You're both return visitors to the morning show. I wanted to start out asking you about last semester, because last semester was the Choral Society's first foray into having virtual rehearsals. So how'd it go? What worked well? What was challenging?
Well, first of all, good morning, Mary. Great to see you,
Good
and
morning.
thank you for having Penny and me on the show. Good morning, Penny. Nice to see you as well.
Ryan.
Good morning. Um, Last semester was an enlightening and invigorating and huge learning experience for me. Um, Many may not know that I had been sort of out of the community chorus realm for 10 years. I had conducted the Concord Chorale and the Concord Chorus for 10 years and then took a 10-year hiatus from conducting community choirs while I was doing my work at Emmanuel, which I'm still doing, and then came back to the community chorus realm and was perhaps most excited about forming relations and creating a sense of community. And that was the one thing that we were deprived of.
Yeah, I know.
So, and not knowing anybody really, other than in little Zoom meetings, and he's only hearing the chorus sing once. Well, twice. I'd been to a concert and heard the chorus sing, of course, at my audition. So it presented numerous, I don't want to say challenges, I'll say opportunities. Opportunities to find new ways to make music, new ways to enrich. And for me, it was a huge learning experience to figure out how to do this on Zoom. Every Tuesday when I'd leave, prepare to do this, my wife would jokingly say, "Are you ready for your one-man show?" Because that was so often what it felt like. That you don't get, there's no visual, verbal cues. You're not reading body language, face. You can't
Yeah.
respond to what you're hearing. So much of what a conductor does in rehearsal is your planning as a conductor is to know the score inside and out. And then you take what the choir gives you and you respond to it. And then you guide them and help them along. And you can't necessarily always plan for where they might have troubles.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I was doing when we would sing, which would be limited because of all the challenges of Zoom, is anticipate where might there be a difficult passage, where might there be problems. So, and we had some fantastic guest speakers, and Penny one day gave us a very interesting presentation on art, on the artwork during the time of Fauré's Requiem. So there were a number of activities that we were able to do that we wouldn't normally have had the time were we preparing for a concert. So learned a lot from it, and I'm looking forward to essentially the same format with some enhancements moving into the spring.
Ryan's being very self-effacing, but of course it was true that he would do these wonderful things but had no idea what we were thinking on the other side or responding. So as you can even see in this moment, Ryan has this presence that radiates through the screen, so that as being on the other side on these Zoom rehearsals, we felt you, Ryan. It seemed as if you were really talking to every one of us. And in fact, and that way, it was a kind of deeply personal connection, because you were sometimes the only face we were seeing. We got each of you, we had you individually. And good music directors can make that connection with their singers, no matter if they're standing on a stage or standing in the orchestra pit or being, in one screen on Zoom. And Ryan made us feel like he knew us, he understood us, he heard us. He was excellent in judging where we might struggle in a new score that we were learning, so that he could predict very well and hit those spots for us to work on our own. And but unfortunately, Ryan, you could never feel the connection that we were trying to send through the atmosphere. So the Zoom rehearsals worked very, very well. Because I'm a section leader, I would hear, Ryan would get lots of responses too from the chorus, but I would get responses from my section immediately after rehearsal about how well it went, what great singing tips Ryan provided to all of us. We have to keep our voices in shape, they're muscles. And if we don't keep singing, there won't be much of a choral sound to come back to when we get to meet again in the fall. So it was very effective and it was very engaging.
Well, now is when I come transparent and say, yes, I'm a member of the Choral Society, and I was there too. And I'll just underline several times and put in capital letters everything that Penny just said, and the opportunity to have the strangely one-on-one instruction with Ryan, and also the array of guest speakers. They were tremendous. And so that makes me even more eager to hear about your plans for the coming semester, which will start, I think, registration is ongoing already. So tell us about plans for the spring session, and I'm particularly curious to find out, I know the theme is, how can I keep from singing? So tell us how you arrived at that theme, and what are the plans?
Sure. Well, we start February 2nd is the first Zoom session, and I think we're meeting for 13 weeks with 1 week off in the middle. In any case, yeah, the theme, how can I keep from singing? That's a hymn or a song that I've always been intrigued by, especially the text, and it seemed obviously apropos during this time of struggling to find ways to sing together. And there was a piece by a Canadian female composer, Sarah Quartel, that she had arranged this hymn by Robert Lowry, a very compelling arrangement that is accessible and challenging at the same time, which it's not always easy to find that mix, that I thought might be something. One of the things, let me back up, one of the things that I've wanted for Newburyport Choral Society is to have a sort of collection of repertoire that we sing every year, and that if somebody, let's flash forward 10 years, comes back to sing with us and hasn't been with us in a while, they know this piece.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of community that's created by a common repertoire. And also an opportunity, if we ever want to gather in smaller groups or we can't get the whole group together, these pieces are in our DNA, as it were, that we can just sort of get together and sing. The text is fantastic. And so that was my starting point. And in a music committee meeting, Penny, who is such a treasure for the Newburyport Choral Society, as I'm learning more and more, and she's the smell notwithstanding, she's like an onion, and we keep peeling layers back, and I learn more and more about Penny's rich knowledge and experience. And as I was presenting this to the music committee, Penny, in her amazing way, found a way to weave together a theme, and what came out of this is this idea that over time there have been numerous groups that have been kept from singing, have been marginalized, have been discriminated against, and what are their stories, and how have they resisted, and how have they continued to sing. And so with that as a theme, I have, in addition to the composer, Sarah Quartel, who's going to come meet with us on April 20th, we will have a colleague of mine, Brad Dumont, who's also on the board of the Greater Boston Choral Consortium. He has a whole prison ministry of working with incarcerated individuals and how they can continue to make music. So he's going to come speak to us on February 16th about singing and making music in incarceration and what that means. Then we have an incredibly vibrant and up-and-coming conductor who is the assistant conductor of Vocal Essence, which is a professional choral ensemble out of Minneapolis. This gentleman's name is George Philip Schultz, or he goes by GPS, and he also conducts their youth chorus, which is an intentionally diverse youth chorus. And he will be joining us, and along with the Greater Newburyport Children's Chorus, is going to be on this Zoom with us as well, to talk to us about what he calls transformative community engagement. and talk to us about how these, especially in his youth chorus, these groups of students that have been kept from singing or marginalized or have met so many obstacles, but how they've fought through and how he's able to create this community of singers. And also to talk to us a little bit about how we as a predominantly white community can sort of work against our white privilege and can engage with a community that we otherwise might not, and educate ourselves on this. And then we have this another gentleman.
Wait, Ryan,
Oh yeah,
a little
please.
bit, right, because I met Philip Schultz this summer. He offered two people in the Boston area, NATS Boston, the National Association of Teachers of Singing, and Boston Singers Resource, and the Greater Boston Consortium. There were three groups that gathered around Philip and opened it up to anyone who was interested. And I was able to join a month-long conversation with him. And the talks were called Table for More. And the idea was inviting more people, more singers to the table of this, wonderful genre of choral singing. He was magnificent. You have to join this semester, and you have to hear these speakers. And one of the things that he's done with his group of engaging students of color, high school students of color, to sing together was that through grant writing, there is no tuition. They are given dinner. They are given all of their performance clothing needs. They are provided transportation. And that's crucial because some of those students would come from such difficult households. They may be caught in the moment and not able to get to rehearsal. And Philip would actually notice that somebody was missing and drive to their house and pick them up and bring them back. So it gave every moment that they could all be together. And so he will show clips of their singing. They sometimes write their own music and write their own words, write their own poetry. And they're just amazing. But he has so much more to say to all of us. So Ryan is leading the Choral Society in this new profound hall, also based on Black voices, making Black singers' voices matter. So it's attached to Black Lives Matter. And one of the things that they are recommending is the sensitivity we have, not just to the pieces that we're singing. And Ryan has been leading that charge with our Choral Society. We've been singing pieces by color, wonderful, wonderful pieces by Black composers that we're now being exposed to. But Philip also talked about, he doesn't even recommend the word inclusion. He recommends the word belonging. So, and it's a whole different energy. It's not bringing people into what we're already doing. It's widening what we're doing and changing what they're doing to accept and make everybody feel welcome.
Well, these plans,
it's going to be a supercharged semester. So Ryan, go ahead and continue.
Yeah. Oh, now it sounds wonderful. It just sounds fascinating and educational and transformative. And I'm curious to find out, because I'm sure people listening and or watching will want to know, can anyone participate, even if they haven't been a singer before or been part of Choral Society before?
Absolutely. So registration is going on right now. So all you have to do is go to the Newburyport Choral Society website, and there'll be information about how to sign up. Registration, it's $75. But if money is a concern, if you're not back to work during this period of COVID, you can speak to the membership committee leader and your membership will be waived. They will even help with the purchase of music. So high school students should also join. And registration will continue until February 9th.
Okay.
So you could even attend 2 sessions and then still register.
Okay.
And then let me give you an email. It's info@newburyportchoralsociety.org that you could write with your own questions if you want, or you could call 978-462-0650.
Okay.
And then somebody will get back to you. So definitely we encourage new people to join. People who just would like to be a fly on the wall and watch all of this, or take a gamble on joining in the warm-ups and the singing and learning music, because you're going to only be heard by your four walls.
And how can you keep from singing after all?
Exactly.
Well, Brian, in closing, two things. Just first of all, anything else that you wanted to add about your plans for the semester, and then what are your hopes for the summer and maybe next fall in terms of maybe actually being able to gather together?
Great questions. I'll just to sort of wrap up what's happening in our season 2 there, I just want to mention one other guest. Is a gentleman named Dr. Ahmed Ansaldua, who is a Mexican-Egyptian composer, conductor, and pianist, who is, along with, he's co-editor of a book that's called the Justice Choir Songbook, and where he's essentially, it's a collection of songs that are, some are new and some are repurposed, that are selected from a national call for scores and older scores, and these are all songs with texts towards social justice and environmental justice. He is going to come be a guest and talk to us about this Justice Choir Songbook and how can we as choral singers be part of this call to action for justice and for diversity, equity. I was going to say inclusion, but I'll say belonging instead.
Very good.
And then we'll also have a vocal pedagogy specialist come talk to us about vocal health. As far as, and I just wanted to say one quick thing about the repertoire. One of the things that I discovered over the course, because of our members giving some really helpful feedback, was that there are challenges, as we knew, to singing on Zoom, especially if you are new to the group, or you're, part of the beauty of community singing is that you have each other to lean on and to learn from and to guide each other. And, of course, that's missing on Zoom. So one of the things that we're doing this term is we're going to recall some older repertoire that is familiar. And I'm sort of going with the idea of something old, something new. And so finding some balance so we have the opportunity to sing some things that are familiar and at also the same time, push the envelope a little bit and challenge us. So, and then moving on to your question about what do we hope for the future? Well, we hope that, we have many hopes.
Yes, we do. Really.
Exactly. Of course, singing in a large group, 120 singers and having an audience is probably one of the last things that we'll be able to do as a society. And we recognize that. And at the same time, Lord knows I'm going to push to get us to being together safely as soon as possible. And so, we are incredibly optimistic and hopeful that come fall we can start to slowly gather again. And, the hope is that we'll have a triumphant and joyful return to community singing at our holiday concert in December. And, and if we're so fortunate as to be together before then in smaller groups, even better. But I think realistically, we're looking at December. Yeah.
Well, we can hope, and time will tell. And hopefully we'll have a more expansive vaccination program available, soon. Mm-hmm. Ryan and Penny, thank you so much. It sounds like an extraordinary semester, and I really appreciate your taking the time to come on the morning show to talk to us about it. But we're sadly out of time for today. So thank you for watching and listening, everybody. I hope you'll join us next Thursday on the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it will be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show, ncmhub.org. Just click on the icon and look for the playlist. Each show will also air on WJOP on Friday at 8 a.m. and then again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. It'll also be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just click on the cloud icon at ncmhub.org and scroll down. Please join us next week when we'll explore why education about the causes of and the history of genocide is so important. Claudia Weidman of the Shoah Foundation will be here to discuss the survey research findings they've done about the many, many positive downstream impacts of genocide education, not just in expanding fading knowledge about the Holocaust, but also in promoting tolerance and increasing what they call upstander behavior, or the effort to intervene when observing acts of intolerance or hatred. With her, we'll be visiting the show will also be Senator Michael Rodrigues of the Massachusetts Senate. He's the principal sponsor of an act concerning genocide education in the legislature. It passed unanimously in the Senate in July, and it's currently pending committee review. So he'll be here to talk about the bill, where it stands, and how you can support it. So please join us next Thursday at 9 on 9. And until then, I hope everybody has a wonderful week. And thanks again, Ryan and Penny, for visiting the show. It was always great to see you. See you in February. All right.
So,
bye,
thank
everybody.
you, Mary. Bye-bye.
Welcome. My pleasure. Bye, Penny.
Bye-bye.